During our Vinaya class, we recently watched a conversation with Venerable Losang Gendun, and he's a Dutch monk who's affiliated with FPMT, and I had not encountered him before, and I really was glad to hear him speak about the role of monks and nuns in Western Buddhism. That was the title of his talk. And he said something that has really stuck with me. He pointed out that many Westerners have a myth when it comes to spirituality or monasticism or meditation, and he described it as the myth of the solitary yogi who just goes off on their own. They live in a cave, they don't see or talk to any human being for many, many years, and they become enlightened because of that, actually, because there's no people around to annoy them. But he says this is not true in reality at all, and that any kind of spiritual practice you never do completely on your own. And I've heard this many times before, and I've actually said this in BBCs before, but there was this part of me that really was resistant to that notion that I was completely dependent on others for my spiritual practice, for what matters to me most in life. And why is that scary? Well, it's because most human beings are not enlightened. So when I think about being dependent on unenlightened beings, all sorts of disasters arise in my mind. The trouble is, well, I shouldn't be dependent on them for my spiritual practice. I should be dependent on the Buddhas and the Arya Sangha for guiding me along the path. So that's, helped to reduce some of the fear that comes up. And it's been also difficult because I feel like there are these very romantic notions of individualism in Western culture, and certain aspects of the Buddhist life story and the early monks really fit well into that myth, basically, that depiction of people just living off on their own. And that's one of the reasons I was attracted to Buddhism, is this notion of not being at the mercy of anybody else and their misguided notions. So my favorite description of the essence of the Dharma is from the Udana, which is a text in the Pali Canon. And the Buddha says, just as the mighty ocean has but one taste, the taste of salt, so even the Dharma Vinaya has but one taste, the taste of freedom. And yesterday in the car, Venerable Chuni was sharing about how there's this organization who's done research about how to engage audiences on political topics. And this is for religious organizations, so how to communicate to them around political topics. And they polled people for what are the most popular keywords or catchphrases that people really like, they really resonate with, they respond to well. And she learned that democracy was number 17 on the list. But really towards the top is freedom, right? So we are a freedom-loving country for sure. So yeah, that really has influenced how I came to this path. And this notion of freedom is like you're completely independent and you're not affected by anybody else, should you choose. But pretty soon you're gonna get hungry, you're gonna want some clothing, you're gonna want this, you're gonna want that. Then you go up to somebody and you say, hey, give me that. But that's only because you choose, But true freedom is like, I don't need anybody. See you later. And yeah. It recalled, what came to mind is that film Braveheart. And I don't know if you've seen it. Mel Gibson is a leader of the Scottish resistance against the English army, and he gives this very rousing speech to all of the ragtag Scottish soldiers, and he says something like, give me death, or give me freedom, or give me death. And so yeah, this value of freedom really has continued to stay with me. And I've been able to find some support for that in some of the texts. So many of there are many passages in the Pali Canon that praise solitude, and not just mental solitude, physical solitude. And then Shantideva, he gives some very attractive descriptions of this, chapter 8 of Engaging in Bodhisattva's Deeds. He says, "When shall I come to dwell with these delights of deer, birds, and trees in the forest, that say nothing unpleasant when associated with? I shall dwell in caves, in empty shrines, or at the feet of trees. When shall I not look back and be without attachment?" But then you enter monastic life, and you have never been more dependent in your life since you've been a small child. So it's like a complete 180, or that's how it felt like to me. So you're dependent on your teachers for the teachings and for guidance. You're dependent on lay supporters for your food and your requisites. You're dependent on your fellow monastics for emotional support and for running the monastery. And then while coming to terms with all of this, you realize that, the freedom that the Buddha was talking about is not freedom from social obligations and responsibilities. It's freedom from the idea that I can exist separately from others and not have to care about their welfare at all. And then I was also thinking about how we say we take refuge in the Sangha, and what does that mean as a member of the Sangha? And Venerable Losung Gunden talked a lot about service, serving the Sangha. And I thought that this is actually a really good way to take refuge in the Sangha, is to serve the Sangha. And this is what we do on the infrastructure team. We take care of the buildings because they protect us. They're our physical refuge, and it only makes sense to take care of them and invest in them and put our time and effort into keeping them in good condition. So it's exactly the same with our fellow Sangha members. We need to take care of them if we expect to have the conditions that we need to continue to practice well. So it's really not an issue of putting others before me. It's we're one Sangha. When you serve others, you serve yourself at the same time. And yeah, that just becomes more and more apparent the longer I live in a Sangha. So it's also helpful for me to remember that spiritual practice is always a collective endeavor, and that this is not something to be feared. It's something that can be embraced. And I think about how the appearance of a Buddha in the world is not just dependent on the Buddha's merit, but it's dependent on the merit of all the people who learn from him or her. And I think about how the Dalai Lama really is possible because of the faith of the Tibetan people and all the other Buddhists who follow him, and all of the education and training that he received as a small boy. The Tibetan people really created the Dalai Lama through all of their virtuous activities. And then monastics are totally products of collective activity. We receive all of our precepts from preceptors who have passed it down since the Buddha. Again, we get all of the teachings from Shakyamuni and then all of the teachers who have followed. The lay supporters provide our food. And then we do all of our rituals with one another, all of our monastic ceremonies. We need one another to actually be monastics. So I really want to keep reflecting on how to renounce the world doesn't mean to renounce our connections and our affections for others, but rather to renounce the notion that there's this inherent separation between self and others. And in that way, really continue to serve others with a lot of joy and wisdom and without any kind of feeling like this is a burden or this is getting in the way of my practice, but to realize that serving others is truly serving yourself.